Welcome to day 2 of the Space and Geospatial Virtual Pavilion for COP26. My name's Andy Bennett and I'm the Space Lead at KTN. We at KTN are here to help companies and academics connect for positive change. And by that I mean enable people from different communities, different parts of the UK and internationally, and from different sectors to meet and collaborate. We want these new connections to enable change that helps. And in the context of climate change, we want the new collaborations to develop that help organisations meet net zero emissions or adapt and mitigate against climate change impacts. Yesterday and the first day of the pavilion, we had 2 excellent sessions, opening proceedings with a great panel session involving some of our partners of the pavilion, including Ros Goodfellow from the Geospatial Commission, Harsh Veer-Sangha from the UK Space Agency, Denise McKenzie from AGI and Nick Shea from UK Space. This was followed by a really interesting session on how climate change contributes to global instability and socioeconomic security issues, and some excellent contributions from geospatial companies including Alkis and Tomorrow.io. If you haven't watched them, I strongly recommend you go back and check out those sessions. They're available on the platform for about 90 days after the end of this pavilion. I also encourage you to use the virtual pavilion platform to network with your fellow attendees. There are over 1,000 registered attendees now on the pavilion, and you can request one-to-one meetings with anyone on the platform and also with any of the speakers as well. We also have networking tables that open at lunchtime, and you can join those with other participants to have unmoderated discussions. So back to today, I am delighted to introduce today's session, as this is a topic that I've, like many I'm sure, had some training in, but haven't really explored in detail, and my knowledge was somewhat limited. So it's been great pulling this together because I've had some amazing and insightful conversations with the panelists you'll hear from today and other contacts in the space and geospatial ecosystem. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more of what they've got to say. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chair for the session, KTN's very own Kirsty Hewitson. Kirsty is one of our directors at KTN and a champion of ED&I across the organisation. So over to you, Kirsty.
Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everybody. As Andy said, my name is Kirsty Hewitson. I'm the Capability Director at KTN, and it's my absolute pleasure to be chairing today's session, which is on creating space for everyone, how diversity and inclusion can support climate action in the geospatial ecosystem. This panel is going to explore how diversity and inclusion can lead to better decision making and improve outcomes for everyone together. Also with how the lack of diversity continues to fragment climate initiatives and slow down innovation and action. And we'll do this from a space and geospatial perspective, given that this is the overall focus of the pavilion. But where I'm going to actually start is with providing definitions for equality, diversity and inclusion so that we're all at the same starting point. And for that, I'm going to ask Anita, please can you share the slides? Next slide, please. So the first definition is around equality. And that's really about the fair treatment of everyone. And in the UK, we actually have legislation called the Equality Act 2010, which is the year that it was introduced, that legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. And it's illegal to discriminate against anyone based on those characteristics described there, and they're known as the 9 protected characteristics. But actually, when you think about it, equality might not actually go far enough, and that's illustrated in the diagram that I've shown on the slide. So if we think about equality, that's about giving everybody equal access to the same support. But in reality, different people might need different support, and really that's about equity, which is the middle one. But if we're going to take it actually a step further, what we need to do is actually completely remove all those barriers which hinders individuals. And people refer to that, for example, as liberation. So what we need to really do is progress from equality to equity and then on to full liberation. Next slide, please. With regard to diversity, this is really all about the people and ensuring that we have a good mix of people. We need to recognize that although people may have things in common with one another, we're also different in many different ways, and that's okay. And inclusion is where we recognize those differences and we actually see them as a benefit, and where people can come to work, they can interact with one another and actually feel confident to be themselves, so bring their whole selves to work. And inclusion ensures that everyone feels valued, but also adds value. And then I have one final slide, which is the next one, please, Anita, which is around the business case. And I realize there's a lot of text on this screen, but I wanted to highlight two reports from McKinsey and Company. And I have to declare that I have no association or interaction with McKinsey at all, but these are two really relevant and important papers. The first one was published back in 2015 called Diversity Matters, where they looked at over 360 companies across a range of countries to consider how gender and ethnicity affects financial performance. And they found that, and you can read the stats for yourself, that those which were more diverse with respect to gender or ethnicity performed better. And they followed that up last year with another further study where they expanded it to 1,000 companies in 15 countries. And again, they saw this evidence that diversity, certainly from a gender and ethnicity perspective, really drives improved financial returns. But there's other papers out there as well, which shows that diversity and inclusion drives improved innovation. It drives that diversity of thought. It drives improved productivity. And hence, I truly believe now that there's no longer any reason to justify why we need diversity and inclusion. It's something that we should all ultimately be striving for. Thanks, Anita. If you could stop sharing the slides. So with that, I'm now going to hand on to our first panelist, which is Heidi Tiemann. Heidi is the director and co-founder of the Space Skills Alliance. And Heidi is going to provide an overview of the diversity survey undertaken for the space sector. Heidi, over to you.
Thank you, Kirsty. There we go. All okay? Brilliant. Okay, so hi there. My name is Heidi Tiemann, and I'm the director of the Space Skills Alliance. And I'm really delighted to be here with everyone today at the KTN's Virtual Pavilion. So in the next couple of minutes, I wanted to talk to you a bit about some recent stats that we've gained about the demographics and diversity of the UK space sector. So in 2020, we carried out the first national survey of the space workforce. And this survey, which was called the 2020 Space Census, was commissioned by the Space Skills Advisory Panel in order to understand a bit more about the people in our sector. So in total, we had about 1,500 people respond, which is about 5% of the space workforce as we understand it. And the respondents to this covered pretty much every region of the UK, every role, every subsector, from Goonhilly to Glasgow, industry to academia, and finance to flight dynamics. So from this data, we've been able to build a picture of the people in the space sector, how represented they are, how they feel, whether they enjoy their jobs, what their salaries are, whether they want to stay in the sector or whether they want to leave, and a whole host of other things. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to give you a snapshot of some of the things that we found. So I'm going to start off with gender as some of the one of those protected characteristics. We found that in the sector, women and non-binary people make up about 30% of the space sector overall. In industry, this is a bit less, about 23%, and in academia and government, it's a bit more, about 41%. So you can see with this graph on the screen, actually, on average, women and non-binary people are younger than men, slightly younger, and they make up about 40% of people entering the space sector. So we've got a kind of younger balance of men and women and non-binary people. We don't know at the moment if this means that the gender balance of the sector is improving, or whether we always have a diverse range of people entering the sector who then later leave. But that's something that we want to find out, and something I'm sure we can discuss. In terms of ethnicity, we find that the space sector is pretty much on par with the general workforce. But that figure, that on-par figure, really disguises the fact that Black people in particular are significantly underrepresented in the space workforce. We only have about 1% versus the 3% we might expect. We don't also see more young people of a minority ethnic background entering the space sector. We don't really know why. So there are things that we will need to understand better in order to kind of capture the space sector for everyone. Moving to sexuality, we find that around 10% of the space sector in the UK identifies as LGBTQ+, which is a statistic primarily driven again by younger people. But despite there being fairly good representation, we find that still about 1 in 4 LGBTQ+ people do not feel comfortable being open about their sexuality and who they are in the workplace. And again, that's something that we really do need to tackle. And this is the last kind of general demographic slide I'm going to give you on the protected characteristics. And this is on secondary education. So secondary education, or the type of secondary education that someone went through, is often used as a proxy for socioeconomic background without being too invasive and asking for everyone's kind of financial details. So you can see that between this graph, this comparison between the space sector and the rest of the UK, we found that there are roughly double the number of privately educated people in the space sector and almost 5 times the number of selective or grammar school educated people in the space sector compared to the UK as a whole. So this kind of tells you the backgrounds of a lot of the people working in the sector, and what we can do to reach out to a wider number of people. So we've had a look at kind of some basic statistics here, and honestly, there are hundreds more that I can share, but I really don't have time to today because we're going to get onto a great discussion. Instead, I've got a couple more statistics which talk about really how inclusive and how equitable the space sector actually is, which goes back to what Kirsty was saying. So firstly, how inclusive is the space sector? Well, when we surveyed people in the 2020 space census, we asked people, how welcome do you feel in the space sector? And they could answer always, sometimes, rarely, or never. The positive is that very, very few people feel never welcome in the sector, about 1% across any demographic. But the rest of the results are telling. So this graph up here on screen is kind of one I wanted to share with you. We found that overall, fewer than 50% of women always feel welcome in the space sector, and this always gets worse for people of colour. Whether you're male or female or non-binary, if you're not white, you're not likely to feel very welcome in the space sector, and that's something that we urgently need to tackle. And finally, how equitable is the space sector? It's kind of hard to tell from a demographic survey, but one of the kind of proxies, one of the stats that we can share is around pay. We looked into different types of pay gaps, whether they exist or whether they don't. And for some aspects of the census data, we don't have enough data. For example, we don't have enough data to look into whether there's an ethnicity pay gap, really. But we can look into a gender pay gap. And we found that however we broke down the data, there is a significant gender pay gap in the space sector, which only gets worse with seniority or also age as well. So you can see here that, for example, for a senior level woman in the space sector, they are on average earning about £9,000 less than their male counterpart. So there's no escaping really the fact that pay inequality is one of the big areas that we may need to focus on to make our sector more equitable. So that's all the stats I'm going to have time to share with you today for now, but I'm sure lots more will come out in our kind of upcoming discussions. If you do want some more stats though, do just check out our reports. We've got a few out at the moment and more will come in the coming months. So I will pass back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. Those stats are absolutely fascinating. And could I encourage the delegates, please, that if they have any questions, please put it in the chat box, and you can also interact with one another. But Heidi, I actually have a quick question for you. It was quite interesting to see that at that lower age group, sort of the 18 to 24-year-olds, there were 40% female representation. Is that because there's been any specific targeting through STEM outreach or via apprenticeships? Do you think that number is relatively high compared to some of the other age groups?
Yeah, I think partly there's been a lot of work done, particularly the Institute of Physics has done a great job at encouraging young girls to pursue a STEM GCSE or A-level. But we know that hasn't had a huge change. We don't really know whether there's always 40% of women entering the sector and whether they just drop off over time and actually they just get discouraged even. So if we repeat this again, if that result comes up again, it's going to be telling that there's been improvements in the sector and people are encouraged, and it's not just a fluke, but we're going to have to keep monitoring, really.
Great, thanks, Heidi. We're now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Fiona Thompson. Fiona is a Space Academic Network Fellow at Durham University, but actually considers herself to be a nomadic researcher. So she's a visual ethnographer, a human geographer, and a philosopher in her 9th discipline. So Fiona, over to you for a few words.
Oh, thank you. Can you see my screen? Great. Thank you for that introduction, and Heidi, thanks for the talk. So I'm going to talk about diversity and inclusion from a slightly different way. I'm based in an astrophysics department. In fact, most of my colleagues look upwards, not downwards, but we're going to talk about looking down, as some of the colleagues in instrumentation do. So the 9, give me a little bit of context. The 9 protected categories, they're very important to support, as Heidi talked about, because diversity creates a new way of thinking. Even though in the everyday world, the work that I work as an ethnographer, our identities are completely less binary, far more complicated. We get up in the morning, we get to the end of the day, and we're constantly negotiating who we are. Sometimes we're excluded, sometimes we're not. As Kirsty said in the introduction, we all have different needs. But I here want to think bigger. This is COP26. I'm talking about space. We're talking about climate change, global issues. And the idea about the satellites, well, it's the sensors and the cameras on the satellites that are doing, that are gathering the data and the images. They're doing full orbits. They inherently rely upon diversity from different nations, different aspects. So the idea is diversity and inclusion beyond individuals. If you look at this image here of Earth Explorer up at Cryosat, that's the satellite that looks at the thinning of the ice when you see pictures of the polar bears. And then Swarm looks at the Earth's magnetic fields, and actually they're looking at the patterns of migratory birds, which can have quite an impact upon whether it's wind farms, the large offshore wind farms. And then if you look at Sentinels, they're further out into space. They're still in something called low Earth orbit, which is considered under 2,000 kilometers. And if you look at Sentinel-5, that is the satellite that was telling us during lockdown that the nitrogen dioxide and the carbon monoxide was reducing. And each of them, they're there in pairs, so that when one begins to disappear, the other one will carry on. And you need many different satellites because they have to have a bespoke way of looking at the world. So further up is the weather satellites. So I'm really interested in much more in a wider concepts, which nations, which groups, which organizations, people like Mike's company having access, and academia also having access, being involved in all of these discussions to solve these problems that are incredibly complex. I mean, I started with hunter-gatherers in rainforests, and now I'm in space. And the more and more I look at it, the more you realize how incredibly complicated it is. So I've got 3 questions that I'm really interested in based on my work. The number one is, space is moving towards new space. The idea behind it is that it's small companies, it'll be shareholders, and trading of data is now incredibly valuable. So for example, in the US, the space debris responsibilities move from Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce. So the question is, as more and more data is gathered and they're producing money this way, will you share it? Who will actually have access to it? The second one is this idea about in the know. So when you get data, you have to analyze it, you've got to interpret it, unlock it, and you have to make it trustworthy. You can't trust it blindly, which means that you have to have the ability to be able to look further into data to know whether there's something that we can actually use. And the idea is, for example, Cryosat or the Sentinel-5, they're working with, that's only one tool, they're working with airborne airplanes on the ground. For example, I'm particularly interested in the cryosphere, which is the ice and the snow, and they use sledges. And then hopefully, well, they've also got UAVs, which are uncrewed, not unmanned, I'd like to say, airborne vehicles. And hopefully on the ground, they're also working with the indigenous local knowledge, which brings me to the next one, is looking down. So these satellites are looking down. So the end users, the people on the ground, are they going to be included in the design process? I know next Monday, there is a discussion about space and indigenous work with women's groups. But, is it matching the community needs? Is it their real lives? And is it also matching existing rigorous research on the ground? For example, this is not necessarily an Earth observation, but when I worked in forestry, I worked with one of the head foresters from Colombia, and they did a great deal of work with the small farmers on the ground who were growing opium poppies, trying to find them an alternative crop. And I've read quite recently about Earth observation projects that are looking down and identifying where the illegal crops are being grown. Well, on the ground, they know where they're grown, but the idea is to focus upon the cartels rather than the small growers. So I'll finish with the idea that I think probably one of the areas, the diversity that is missing, is actually working with the Indigenous groups on the ground, which includes in Scotland as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. That was a really thought-stimulating presentation, and hopefully it'll trigger some questions from the delegates who are listening. I'm now going to hand over to our next panelist, who is Gala Camacho, who's a data scientist and one of the directors of Diagonal Works. Gala, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Fiona, that was great. I really appreciated that picture and this different way of looking at satellites. I guess I never actually had considered that. Yeah, okay, so I guess maybe just to introduce myself, I actually started my career as a teacher. And as a teacher, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to include everyone. Because as a teacher, you know, there were classrooms I had where there was 30 students, high school, teaching math or science. And, you know, particularly in math, is a very well-known, hated subject. And I spent a lot of time investigating how to ensure every single student entering my class felt welcome, felt capable, felt like there was a path in which they could do well in this class, but also enjoy the class. And so later on, I did my master's in math, and it dawned on me really strongly that there was actually a discussion being had about why we should include everyone and how far we should go to make sure everyone felt included. And for me, that really kind of started my journey, because I came from a place where there was a huge group of us, and basically the industry focused on how to include, not whether we should include. And then I came to a space where I had to prove why we had to include. You know, even this conversation started with, hey, if you include us, you'll make more money. And so for me, that's a very contrasting conversation, because in one, we were just actively trying to do that. And in the other, we were still trying to convince some people, usually some of the most toxic people, about why we should be included. And so for me, when we talk about climate change, it's very important for me to first state that the global majority are disproportionately affected by climate change. And so having a discussion about why they should be included is a little bit, to me, just almost a little bit ridiculous. It's not why, it's how. How are we going to include them? And so I kind of start that way. That's kind of where my brain is at, I guess, for the purposes of this discussion. If, you know, just to give a bit of my technical background, my master's is in operations research. And now currently I work as a data scientist in a new startup company where our mission is to improve the quality of life of people living in cities. But one of the differences to other technical companies is that we recognize that technology is only a small part of any improvement, and that ultimately the improvement has to be holistic. And so we're a bit of a quirky company. We've set up differently than others. We're steward owned, which we're very proud of. And we're building tools like exploration and data analytics tools to work with open data and in the built environment. And we're we're a multidisciplinary team by design. We have an engineer, I'm a data scientist, we have a designer, and we have a product manager. That's our starting team. And so even from its beginnings, I guess we are valuing this multidisciplinary approach to building technology. And we're called Diagonal. I don't know if I said that. And yeah, that's mostly me. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gala. Really appreciated. And again, if anybody has any questions, please do send them through. And then last but not least, our final panelist is Mike Lauter, who's a founder of Oxford Dynamics, which is company number 4 for Mike. His most successful venture to date is Oxford Space Systems, which is a company that he founded 8 years ago and is now one of the UK's highest valued space tech startup. He's a firm believer in the benefits of diversity and inclusion to unlock the full potential of a company, and sees Oxford Dynamics as an experiment in bringing this to reality. So Mike, over to yourself.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Kirsty. And I think for the first time in 15 years of being involved in the space sector, it's great to be the only male on a panel. So world first for me. So by way of a very quick introduction and background to myself, my degree is in electronic engineering, but I've had a really eclectic career. I've worked actually running a chain of pubs for a property entrepreneur. I worked at the BBC for quite a while. And in fact, in those early career choices, diversity and in fact, female dominated environments were the norm for me. Certainly when I was working behind bars and running a chain of pubs, I was reporting to basically a female property entrepreneur and working alongside female bar staff. And that was kind of the norm for me. And I actually thought my first paid employment, the first time I ever sold any of my time in return for money, was as a paper boy, delivering things called newspapers. You may remember those things. And in fact, most of the staff was paper girls. So I was working alongside a female dominated team. And certainly at the BBC, I think I was probably the only straight guy in the team I was working on, being part of the arts scene. So it's only really been in my latter day of career being a professional engineer, it's become a more monochromatic world, being male dominated and much, much less diversity. And I think one of the big challenges we have in the space sector is we probably epitomize that complete lack of diversity and inclusion. And when I founded Oxford Space Systems just over 8 years ago, I was absolutely determined from day one to maximize diversity and inclusion as much as I can. And I'm really proud to say, when I last looked at the stats, a team of over 55 people, we had 17 different nationalities on the team, and we spoke 35 languages between us. And one of our customers described us as the Rainbow Nation of space technologists. So I was very proud of that. But one thing that did sit uncomfortably with me was the makeup of the board, which, no real surprise, was dominated by the investors, the venture capitalists. And at one board meeting, I looked around the table after folks were congratulating themselves on a particular contract. And I said, look, we've still got a huge amount of work. There's only one non-white face around this table of 8 people, and there's certainly no females around this table. And in fact, even within the company, we don't actually have any females in any senior positions of significance. And that for me is not success. We've done a great job at getting diversity in the workforce, but that is not making its way through to the boardroom. So we've got a lot more work to do. But I won't explain why I'm no longer at OSS. That's another story. I'm on to my next venture, which is Oxford Dynamics. And I actually co-founded that with a young Indian woman by birth, a lady called Shefali Sharma, who's way more qualified than me in the space sector. And it's an equal footing with another co-founder. So Shefali has the same standing as me. And it's been a really interesting experiment so far when we've been in meetings, the amount of people that turn and talk to me rather than Shefali as a young woman of color, when she was the one that asked the question, but the answer is being directed at me. So we're getting some really interesting data on how people interact with us. And I'll end by wrapping up saying one thing I really like to unpack during the question session is kind of how do we address this? And I think one of the big challenges, certainly in tech companies seeking funding, is that the investment industry is still very much dominated by white male investors, and they tend to invest in those people they more closely associate with, which is no real surprise. It's young white males getting the bulk of the investment capital. And one of the biggest challenges is how does a female founder of color actually get in front of investors and raise money, because the stats are even more disappointing. I think it's less than a single-digit percentage of female founders of color being able to successfully raise that initial seed investment. I've got a few ideas how we challenge that, and look forward to discussing those on the panel. That's me. Back to you.
Thanks, Mike. And maybe that's where we'll start, actually, given you've raised the point, is it'd be useful to hear your views in terms of, because the venture capital community does disproportionately invest in white males. From your experience to date, what are kind of any tips and tricks that you've learned in terms of how you can gain investment if you come from a more divergent or different background?
I think what we're seeing in the private equity sector, the VC sector, is the emergence of female-led VC funds. And I think we're probably approaching 20 funds in the UK that are female-led. And it's great that there's actually a natural bias, I think, from female-led funds to favorably give audience to other females from founding teams. And I was just checking the stats this morning. There's actually a number of funds that specifically now focus on diversity, and they're looking specifically at essentially non-white male founders and giving them preferential audience first. So I think if someone is a founder of color and non-white, obviously the first door to knock on are those funds that specifically promote themselves in looking for those opportunities, because there's some brilliant ideas out there. They just don't happen to be fronted by a white team. That doesn't mean the technology ideas aren't any less. In fact, I think people from a diverse background are spotting opportunities that perhaps other folks are missing. And therefore, I think there's some brilliant business ideas out there just waiting to get funded. In the case of my own company, Oxford Dynamics, as I said, I think what's obviously significantly helped Shefali is obviously being a co-founder alongside me. It's probably disappointing to say that perhaps it's my name and previous reputation that kind of gets the door open, but I've been very, very careful and focusing on putting Shefali kind of front and center stage, because she's saying smarter things, way smarter things than me, many times in terms of how we're going to develop the business and grow the technology. And I think it's just, leading by example, giving those female co-founders and female founders the stage to be able to articulate and make their case. And I'm a firm believer of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So I think it's about raising the profile and giving the stage as much as we can.
Great, thanks, Mike. And Gala, would you like to come in at that point? Oh, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry. I guess I just wanted to add that we can also challenge VCs to reevaluate how they decide who is worth the investment and not, because a lot of times we tend to give a lot of value, for example, to credentials when we could be giving a lot of value to experience. And so it's there's so many solutions, for example, that come into this space about how to tackle things like poverty. And so maybe we want to value people who come from poverty. Maybe they have things to say, and maybe their experiences also need to be valued in how we decide to measure whether they're going to be successful. Because a lot of times, well, what am I going to value? An Oxford degree or the fact that you grew up in poverty? And so I think a lot of our systems are set up to value the Oxford degree. And I don't want to minimize the Oxford degree, I just said Oxford for no reason. But the point is, maybe we can find ways to start valuing experiences. Maybe we can find ways to start valuing, for example, the amount of resistance that someone has come to arrive to their pitch, because sometimes that resistance is what's going to make them strong. I mean, everybody knows that one of the most important parts of being a successful startup founder is having just an incredible amount of resilience through like really, really crappy stuff. And so if someone can show that in their experience, they have gone through a lot and they have climbed a lot of mountains to get even just to the pitch, maybe that is something we need to start valuing. And I don't think that currently gets really valued on paper.
Yeah, thanks, Gal. I think that's a really strong point. And I know, for example, through KTN and Innovate UK, we're looking at ways in which, for example, application forms are biased, very much dependent upon what your educational background might be, and that people might be more comfortable, for example, submitting a video or a blog which actually demonstrates their attributes. And we need to recognize that lived experiences are just as important as you say, the credentials that we can demonstrate through a standard CV. Fiona, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, it actually follows on what you said. I have sunshine on me, so I'm quite happy. You talked about lived experience, which is all the work that I do. So I was going to ask Mike. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of your employee. There's such a fine line between when you talk on behalf of somebody. So I wondered why, for example, I presume that she goes and represents the companies. Why today? Why perhaps she didn't come and talk about her experiences?
Yeah,
and I agree with everything you say.
Yeah.
And I know this is a difficult question for me to ask you, because, and I say in all my experience, it's never black and white, but I mean, the area I come from, anthropology, where people will say you can never speak on behalf of somebody else. And I think there's a dialogue more. So I'm not challenging to say that she should have come, but I was just wondering, you know, that because you're workers, you know, like she's.
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
So complex that.
No, it's a great question, and let me answer that for you. She said, Mike, I've been invited to do this panel, but I really think you should do it, because otherwise we're going to end up what we always end up with, which is a panel of females, which can be easily sidelined. And then it's just women whinging at other women. And she said, I think it's going to be far more powerful if you, as a white, middle-aged male with a track record of tech businesses, is actually going to sit on the panel and actually articulate, we need change, and you are part of that change. So I'd feel much more comfortable if you actually went and did this, and then we're getting, a white face, a white male face, who's normally seen as part of the problem, actually articulating we need change. And that's why.
Mike,
I think that's.
Sorry, Heidi, go for it.
I think it's really valuable as well, because I think there's a lot of evidence around women and minority ethnic people ending up having to do a lot of the work all of the time and constantly having their academic time taken by doing panels. So actually having someone come along who's not normally invited to this is quite good, actually. So it's
believe me, I did fight with her. I said, no, it's your panel, you go and do it. And she said, no, I think you should go and do this one. And while I'm doing this, actually, she's in a meeting with one of our lead customers.
Yeah, it's just good that the work is done by people who normally don't end up doing that work.
Yeah, great. I'm going to move us on now from this subject. And we're going to take the first question from the audience, which is from Baljeet Kelsey, and I hope I pronounced your name right. Apologies if not, but the question is, how can we attract more diversity into the space sector? Are there sites, career fairs, etc. anyone can recommend? What's their advice about how we can become more diverse? Who wants to answer that one first? Heidi.
So just from a few kind of really basic sites and areas, there are some fantastic careers and jobs websites, mostly aimed often towards the early career side of things, but particularly, for example, Black in STEM, I believe, is a jobs board which companies can go to advertise their jobs. So actually, from the company point of view, from the HR and recruitment point of view, they should be looking to advertise to a more diverse range of jobs boards and universities and people, rather than just whacking it on their website and waiting for people to come to them. It's a really simple thing that can be done.
Thanks, Heidi. Fiona, from yourself?
I think mine's a slightly different way. When you walk through department stores and you see all the space clothing in the boys section, pick it up and move it to the girls section. Or when you see, you'll sometimes see in representations of women, I'm going to speak about women that are standing like supermodels. Every time if you look at all the different the icons that you see in the space. I mean that is in tandem to what Heidi's saying. There's the formal and the informal, but there's a lot of things in everyday life that perpetuates this view that space is for men.
Great, thank you. And then we're going to move on to a broad question. We've talked about how diversity and inclusion, there's a business case for it, but from a climate perspective, why is diversity and inclusion important to climate change? Mike, is that a hand up? Gala.
Okay, I guess I'll say it again, is that the global majority is disproportionately affected by climate change. So they should have a say on what the solution is going to be, how it's going to happen, and what are going to be the give and takes, because ultimately they are the ones being disproportionately affected. This is also true for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in places like the UK, the US, Australia. And so I think it's not like, why is it important? Because it affects them. And if it affects you, then you should have a voice and you should have a say. And there should be ways and steps and ladders for how you get to have a say in what the solution is. Because otherwise, aren't we just doing colonialism in a different way? Like, are we just going to go tell them how, or, us, I guess, like how we're going to solve this and how, we're going to save them? Like, that's not the way. We've already experienced such solutions and they did not work. They led us to where we are right now. And so the only thing we can do now is like inject new voices, inject new experiences, because some of the solutions we've had so far, they just aren't working. I mean, it has been this non-diverse sector that has led us to where we are today. And we need to understand that. And I think we need to make space for new and different solutions, a lot of which are going to come from the lived experience.
Thanks, Gala. Fiona and then Mike.
I think that the key thing about diversity for me is that is to do with the fact these topics are so complex, and that we need to constantly be questioned and challenged, and to think, and it is unbelievably, you need knowledge from all different areas. The amount of uncertainty, and people are not listening. So, I mean, in Nunavut in Canada, the Inuits decades ago noticed the ice was thinning and nobody listened. And the same with the fishing people in and around Scotland. They knew the stocks were disappearing. So that alternative view, now it wasn't always accurate when they began to look at it, but it made people start to look in a different way and to ask the question. So I think it's that constant questioning that we need, because it is so complex.
Thanks, Fiona. And then Mike, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a global problem. We need all hands on deck to solve this. And the West has a track record of high-tech solutions, which we know aren't always the best way forwards. And of course, they normally come with vested interests in pushing technologies. So I think looking for a much more diverse and inclusive way of solving these problems has to be the way forward. And there's some fantastic examples out there. In fact, I was reading a piece a couple of months ago. It was how do we get lighting indoors? I think it was in rural communities in Africa. The West was proposing low-cost solar panels to go on the roof with LED lights inside. And a guy who grew up in the village said, it's not a problem, there's enough light, we don't need solar panels, it's about getting light through the roof effectively. And he spotted a huge waste problem with plastic bottles building up around the village. His solution was, I take a plastic bottle, I fill it with water, I put a little bit of bleach in there to stop algae growing, and we put these through the ceilings in the houses, and the water acts as a prism and disperses the light very effectively inside. What a great
think we might have lost Mike. I think so. So we'll move on to a next question, await Mike's return. And actually, the next question is going to relate to a point that Heidi raised, which is even if we succeed at achieving diversity.
Great low-tech solution.
Sorry, Mike, we lost you for a moment there.
I'm not sure where I got to. So I think there's some great low-tech solutions out there. I was talking about the plastic bottles and being very low-cost lighting solutions in African villages. So I think there's many thousands more ideas out there. We don't always need high-tech solutions from the West.
Christy, can I just really want to add to an example, if that's okay. I'll just take a couple seconds. A great example in Australia has been in Indigenous fire management. For years, we dropped Indigenous fire management strategies, and we had really terrible fires. And I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years back in the Kimberley region in the north, they started going back to Indigenous fire management, putting it in the leadership of a lot of Indigenous people. And if you read the Guardian article that summarizes this, it says that that has been one of the most significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction practices in Australia. And so it is not like, it is, I think the point is including people whose experience, when we value people's experiences, not just coming from the UK, from the US, from, these white communities, we don't just get, cherries on top. We can actually get a completely different solution that this one, for example, had been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And so I think it's just very important that we do not treat it as the cherry on top, that we treat it as from the ground up change that can really revolutionize the things that we are doing. I think that's very important.
Thanks, Gala. And I think that really is a valid point there about, again, making sure that we include all people in the decision making and really pull on that global knowledge in terms of fighting climate change. I'm going to move us on in the interest of time because we only have about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to come back to the question that was raised during Heidi's presentation, which is, even if we succeed at achieving diversity, how do we retain them? So this is about the attrition rates and how do we ensure that we actually keep people involved within our sector. And any comments? Heidi?
I'll pick up on the start, because I think some of the stats I didn't talk about was around the harassment side of things in the space sector and across all sectors, actually. So whilst people don't feel welcome, that's just the very tip of the iceberg. Actually, we find that I think it's the majority of women at some point have experienced some form of sexism. About 10% of all women in the space sector say they've experienced sexual harassment, and minority ethnic people have experienced a significant amount of racism in the sector. So to keep people, it's simply a fact of but changing how all of us act towards people who are different to us. It's not just about putting in some nice fancy company diversity day. It's actually about fundamentally changing how we act to the people that we work with and being more respectful.
Thanks, Heidi. Gala?
Yeah, I think following from what Heidi said, and maybe just to, again, uproot the question, maybe instead of focusing on how do we keep women or people of color, how do we identify those who are unwelcoming or causing harm, and how do we get rid of them? Because if they leave, there will be space for a lot of us to come in. And so I think it's important sometimes to change the perspective, which is how do you and your organization find the people who are actually overworking these employees, who are actually being exclusive, who are not like Mike and not putting, the person of color who is more knowledgeable in front. In one of my previous job experiences, in talking to someone who was actually one of our partners, who would not listen to anything I said, one of the advice I got was that I should say it to my male colleague, and that then he should say it, because the point was for it to be heard. And the point is not anymore for it to be heard. The point is this person needs to be removed because they do not know how to listen. And so I think we can think a little bit about how do we identify these people in our organizations and either help them to change or remove them. And I think that's how we create a lot of space. And this is a topic that's been used in DEI before. In fact, in the Wife Drought, one of the books, I forget the author right now, Annabelle Crabb, she talks about how one of the issues that happens, for example, with men in the workplace is that they do not take holidays and they do not take parental leave. And actually, if they left, there would be a lot of space for women to come back. And so actually, there is a question of space here and how we make it. And one of those ways is to identify the people who are toxic and either help them or remove them.
Thanks, Gal. And we're going to move on to a related question, which actually comes from one of the audiences, members of the audience as well, which is around allyship and the importance of allyship. And I think we've touched on it with you, Mike, today around that importance of helping underrepresented groups. But can anybody on the panel talk about how they have been allies to different underrepresented groups? You've talked about it yourself already, Mike, and what the benefits and the value you've derived from it.
I'll go first, because I probably don't think I've done enough, to be honest. And I think that's being really frank. I think when I've been invited on panels, maybe I could have said there's actually someone who's got a different background from me that could take it and do a better job, or speaking from different places and different examples that I don't have experience of. I think I'm not going to claim that I've been some sort of amazing person by collecting a load of data and showing that things are bad. I think people in the situation where things are bad know it's bad. I hope that very slightly some of that data can help and just inform some of the decision making higher up. But overall, I think there's just many things that I could do which are better.
Thanks, Heidi. And a question that came in directly to yourself, Mike, so I'll come back to you in a moment, Fiona, is what would be your top advice to other white men who are overrepresented, and how they can help lift underrepresented groups and giving them more opportunities?
Well, I think if you're in a position of responsibility and you're a team leader or more senior up in the company, it starts by looking around you. Is your team, is your company a fair representation of society. Invariably, it probably won't be if you're in the space sector. And therefore, you've actually got to be the positive force for change. And I kind of look at it as it's almost like a conveyor belt at an airport. You know, there's travelators. You're saying, well, I don't actively, you know, I'm not actively biased against anybody. Well, if you're not actually a force for change, you're kind of standing still on this travelator and kind of all moving to the left. You know, you're part of the problem. You've actively got to move against it. And of course, in the UK, we need to be very careful. You cannot be biased against people, but you cannot show an unfair bias towards certain people. You've got to be neutral, you know, when you're interviewing. But you are allowed to give, you know, audience to anybody that applies for a job. And every CV that came into me that was from, you know, a non-white male, I interviewed. And the point was very valuably made earlier. It's not just about academic qualifications, it's about life experience. You know, I kind of look for that X factor in someone that I wanted to hire. You know, your academic qualifications are just one thing. What you've done is show that you can pass exams. That doesn't mean you're going to be a great fit on the team. Are you going to be an inspiration to other people from diverse backgrounds that I want to also hire? So will you be a champion that I can hire to help lead the change in the company as well? So if you're a person in that position hiring people, look way beyond just the academic qualifications and be that positive force for change that we all need in companies, because the economic case is there. You know, it's not a case of just doing the right thing. If you're just being purely selfish, you'll have a much more financially successful company with diversity and inclusion.
And Fiona, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, and you're talking about being allies. I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of speaking on behalf of other groups, partly because I get crucified in my field of study. But one of the things that is the most difficult is what they call epistemic injustice, is that people do not speak. They're invited to speak, but you do not speak because you have learned, could be through generations, that no one's listening to you. So a lot of my work, it is about looking for the minority voices. It can be anywhere, whether it's like small fishing villages, where you end up acting as a conduit. But I get told more stories that I'm not allowed to then repeat, because people just don't, that I'm not important, nobody will listen to me. And that is the work that I try and focus a little bit more on. But I mean, I like what Heidi said when she said, you know, I've not done enough. I mean, you know, you constantly keep focusing on it. And the issue is to listen. We all start towards a conversation, and we've got all these things in our head, and a lot of it's the active thing of like, so when I do fieldwork, every time I'm surprised at something, it's because I'm biased. When I go and do fieldwork, I should be surprised by nothing, right? So every time I think, oh, I think that's my bias, and I write them all down. And it happens, it happens more than I'd like to admit.
And I think that's a really valid point. We all have unconscious biases, and we just have to recognize them when they emerge. And also I think we have to be brave to call out behaviors, as we've discussed earlier, that, you know, unacceptable behaviors should be challenged no matter what that level of seniority. I'm afraid we now have to call this session to a close, I think, because of timings. I'd like to thank all the panel members for their contributions. I'd like to thank all the delegates who've been listening for the questions and all the comments that we've received. I think we've had a really expansive conversation around DNI, and we all understand the importance of it, certainly in terms of driving forward and making a difference in the sector. So Andy, I'll hand it over to you now for a final few words.
Thank you, Kirsty, and echo your thanks to the panel, Heidi, Fiona, Gala and Mike. Really appreciate all your contributions today to this really thought-provoking and stimulating discussion. And thanks to Kirsty for chairing an excellent session. We've got lots more to come. So just a bit of a highlight, at 11 AM, so just in a few minutes time, there is a session on environmental, social and governance investing in space. And then that's hosted by Seraphim. And then this afternoon at 2 PM, we have the greenhouse gas monitoring from space, a mapping of capabilities across public, private and hybrid missions. And this is a publication launch, a report launched by the Group on Earth Observations, What Time and Climate Trace, and the World Geospatial Industry Council. So 2 more great sessions coming up today. thanks again to all the people listening in and providing some great questions and comments. And we hope to continue the discussion going forward. Thank you very much and look forward to speaking again soon.